And it's been 8 weeks since I last preached at Grace. Hal asked me last week whether I'd forgotten how to do it. So we're about to find out if I can still pull together a message. Now, I started at the beginning of the year. We're only up to part 4, a new series entitled, Where's God? And we have 3 key scriptures that I'm just going to pop up on the screen for you to have a look at. The first one is Daniel 11:32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and do exploits. A wonderful promise that if you know God, then you will be strong and you will carry out great exploits. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, we read, God blesses you when your heart is pure, for then your eyes will open to see more and more of him. And then Jeremiah 29:13-14, if you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. I will be found by you, says the Lord. Now this morning we're continuing our journey through the Bible, seeking to discover the heart and the actions of God throughout history toward humanity, so that we can better recognize and understand God's actions in our present world, and in the process develop an increasingly close relationship with him. A relationship that can stand up to all of the challenges that our modern society is facing with courage, hope, and an authenticity that is rock solid and grounded in both truth and lived experience. Because it's no use just knowing something. You've got to actually be able to put it into your lived experience. It's got to be real for you, not just on a Sunday, but also a Monday through to a Saturday. The last time I spoke, we looked at Abraham. And there were 2 key lessons learned about God that we took away from his story. The first one was, God plays the long game, which gives us hope. There's always trying to make a comeback whilst we're still breathing. Abraham had a number of significant failures over the course of his life, but he ends on a high note. It's not over till it's over. Slide number 2. What happened? Rob, didn't it come up?
It was blank, yeah.
Your special
I need to sack the person who's doing these slides, which is me. Number 2, God really likes people who believe him when he says something. Not just believe in him, but who believe what he says and then live their lives accordingly. Now today we're going to be looking at his son Isaac, but before we do, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob are considered the foundational patriarchs of the Jewish race. In the Gospels, you'll often hear the phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when referring to Yahweh. God established his covenant with Abraham, confirmed it with Isaac, and then through Jacob, established what would later become known as the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, when you stop and think about it, the way they're spoken of throughout Scripture is a huge honour. Imagine if all of Judaism and Christendom, when talking about God, referenced your name to validate which God they were talking about. And when they did, people immediately knew your whole life story. Put that thought to the back of your mind, and we'll try. Hopefully I'll be able to swing back to it later. Now, the author of Genesis picks up his story after Abraham to talk firstly about Ishmael, Abraham's son by Hagar, Sarah's servant. He lists Ishmael's descendants and finishes by saying, in verse 18 of chapter 26 in Genesis, Ishmael's descendants occupied the region from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt in the direction of Ashur. There they lived in open hostility toward all their relatives. That's a great little footnote about your family, isn't it? There they lived in open hostility toward all their relatives. God had forewarned Hagar when she was pregnant that Ishmael would have issues with his relatives in Genesis 16 verses 11 and 12. And the angel also said, you are now pregnant, will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. That's starting okay. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. We got any wild donkeys in here this morning? He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. Now here we have the first mention in the Bible of two groups of people who can trace their origin back to a promise from God, and yet they find themselves in open conflict with each other. And it didn't take God by surprise. In fact, he forewarned them that it would happen. Now, sometimes people will say that they find it hard to believe in God because of all of the different denominations in our world and the fights and the conflict that spring up at times between them. Now, their argument is that if God is real, then surely his followers would get on with each other. And there's a part of me that kind of agrees with that. Historically, though, that's never been the case. And the reason for that has always been the same. Sin is constantly seeking to corrupt our relationships, or corrupt our relationships with each other, even the relationships of those who would say that they know the same God and have a covenant relationship with him. The state of our relationship with other people has nothing to do with whether God is real or not. And whether a Christian that you know is a good bloke or a mongrel has got absolutely nothing to do with whether God is real or not. That's a really important point to remember in life. Okay, on to Isaac. Genesis 26, 1-6. Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine in Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. Now, just for those who were here for our first message on Abraham, you know that Abraham had some dealings with Abimelech. This is a different Abimelech to the king that Abraham had dealings with. The name or the title of Abimelech is actually formed from two Hebrew words for father and king, and can be interpreted in a variety of different ways, including father king, my father is king, or father of a king. And in the first 5 books of the Bible, it's used as a title for the kings in the land of Canaan. So if you've read through Abraham and you realise he had this issue with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, and then Isaac has an issue with, you're thinking, how old is this guy? He must be incredibly old. And both Abraham and Isaac did the same wrong thing in that they pretended to the king of the Philistines that their wife was actually their sister, so they wouldn't get in all sorts of bother, and it ended up ending okay, but it was still they shouldn't have done that. But sometimes you read, you go, flip. So his dad tried to sell off his wife to Abimelech the king, and then his son does exactly the same thing. It was a different king, but both father and son made the same mistake, which is an interesting generational thing when you think about it. And it goes on. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them all these lands. And through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. I love that last sentence. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. Simple and straight to the point. God told him to do something, and he did it. What else do you think that Isaac did? Well, he got on with living his life as a farmer. And because of his obedience to stay in the land that God had told him to, he was blessed by God in all that he did, in his occupation. I want you to remember that. Genesis 26, 12-15, we read on. When Isaac planted his crops that year, he harvested 100 times more grain than he planted. For the Lord blessed him. He became a very rich man, and his wealth continued to grow. He acquired so many flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and servants that the Philistines became jealous of him. So the Philistines filled up all of Isaac's wells with dirt. These were the wells that had been dug by the servants of his father Abraham. Now it's important to note that even though God's hand was on his life, Isaac also had his fair share of struggles. And where did his struggles manifest? In his occupation, in his day-to-day life. impacting on his livelihood. Genesis 26, 19-22. Isaac's servants also dug in the Gerar valley and discovered a well of fresh water. But when the shepherds from Gerar came and claimed the spring, "This is our water," they said, and they argued over it with Isaac's herdsmen. So Isaac named the well Esek, which means argument. Isaac's men then dug another well, but again there was a dispute over it. So Isaac named it Sitnah, which means hostility. Abandoning that one, Isaac moved on and dug another well. This time there was no dispute over it. So Isaac named the place Rehoboth, which means open space. For he said, "At last the Lord has created enough space for us to prosper in this land." Now the key point here is that he didn't get distracted or dragged into a fight with the Philistines, but instead he kept moving forward, digging new wells in the land that God had told him to stay in, until he finally arrived in a place where he could settle down in peace. There was a process that happened here. Now hopefully this will work. A process. He obeys God's instruction to stay in the land he told him to. Difficulties cropped up, one after another. He kept moving forward whilst remaining obedient to God's instruction. And he finally ends up in a spacious place where he and his family could expand and flourish. Why do you think that God didn't lead Isaac to Rehoboth immediately? As my slide come from. Oh no, you. I'm hearing these noises. I'm thinking I'll just stuff my slide up. Well, why do you think God didn't lead Isaac to Rehoboth immediately? Because God is in the journey just as much as he is in the final destination. In fact, it's often your growth on the journey that prepares you to receive the fulfillment of your promise. So oftentimes we look forward and we think, I can't wait till I arrive there, and we place all of our hope, all of our attention on the destination, failing to realise that it's what happens to us as we struggle through to our destination that changes us. Very rarely does the destination change us. We think, oh, everything will be okay once I've got lots of money. Everything will be okay once I get this opportunity and this door opens up for me. My life will be so much better once this happens. But for most of us who've lived a little bit longer, we've discovered that when you do get to the thing that you're aiming for, you enjoy it for a moment, but then you're looking forward again to more and more and more. There's always something else that you're always moving toward. And we can live our lives thinking that everything will work out when we hit the destination, resenting the journey, and yet it's the journey where we change. It's during the journey that our lives are expanded. It's during the journey that we learn perseverance. It's during the journey that we learn that God can be trusted. It's during the journey that we gain credibility in the eyes of others because they see our faithfulness over a long period of time. There are a lot of people that are quick to say something with their mouths, and then their lives don't back it up. It's when we see people whose lives back up what they're saying with their mouths that we trust them and that we believe in them. The process is so much more important. The journey is so much more important than the destination. So often. Our church is currently facing one of our biggest challenges yet. We've been following a path over the last 6 years, which we believe will take us into the centre of our community, because that's where Jesus wants to be. If you were to ask the question, where do you think Jesus wants to be with regards to a community? Do you think that Jesus wants to be on the outskirts? Well, that's not the answer that I'm sure Jesus would give. Jesus wants to be at the very heart of every community in Australia. He wants to be there. He wants to be accessible. He wants people to know that he's around. He wants people to know his love. He wants people to know about him. And how, as a local church, do you do that? Well, you can pray, but you also have to move. And you have to move into the centre of your community. And the way you move into the centre of a community is through building relationships with people who are already in the community and serving them. And we've been doing that over the last 6 years, and we have seen some incredible things happen in our local community, and it's been incredibly encouraging. Part of that journey has involved the renovation of the old Rokeby Tavern. If you like before and after pictures, go onto our gracecentre.org.au website. You can see what it looked like when we first moved in, and you can see what it looks like now, and you can see the various sections of that tavern that we've upgraded look like in the past. And let me tell you, it looks way, way better now than it did when we first moved in. Along the way, in that renovation, we've hit numerous roadblocks, we've hit numerous hurdles. There have been some that have taken quite a long period of time to get through, but each time that we've hit a new hurdle, we've continued on, placing one foot in front of the other, and as we've done so, we've seen doors open up time and time again. And when we first moved here to Rokeby, into this community, probably 7 years ago now, we're in our 7th year, God gave me a promise from Revelation chapter 3 verse 8. It says this: I see what you've done, now see what I've done. I've opened a door before you that no one can slam shut. You don't have much strength, I know that. You used what you had to keep my word. You didn't deny me when times were rough. And we've seen that happen over the last 6 years. We've seen doors open up in incredible ways. We've seen great favour. God's given us there's a real openness in our community to what we're doing, because our community realises that we're doing it for their good and not for something that we want back from them. We're doing what we've done at the Grace Centre, what we've done in our community, has been done without any strings attached. We're not expecting them to come to church before we actually help them out. We're actually taking the opposite approach to that. We've said, well, look, whether you come to church or not, we're still going to love you, we're still going to care for you, we're still going to provide for you. And because we've done that, and we've done it consistently over the last 6 years, our community is very, very much open to our church, and it's open to us as people. So that's been great. But we've had some challenges along the way. And as I said, we're facing our biggest one ever. You might have remembered, was end of last year? Or middle? When did we get the funding from Healthy Tas?
Middle of last year.
Middle of last year. We'd applied for some funding from Healthy Tas to redevelop the kitchen. And we had received a figure from Fair Brothers, who'd come out and had a look at the building and said, okay, it's going to cost you this much to develop it. And their figure was around about 160,000, 170,000, and we had to add on some extra stuff. So we went with a figure of 200,000, and we put in a funding application to get the kitchen developed, so that Loaves and Fishes, who are a statewide organisation, a Christian organisation actually, who currently provide between 6,000 and 8,000 prepared, ready-to-eat meals to people in crises right around our state every week. They're doing an amazing, amazing job, and they've got a kitchen up north. They wanted to have a kitchen down south. Anyway, we got this guy through. He gave us what he thought would be the price to do it. So we went to Healthy Tas and we asked for $200,000. And then we had an election, so we didn't hear anything back from them. I think it was in January of last year, February of last year, we finally heard back from them that we were successful. And you might remember me coming to the church saying, we managed to raise $200,000, this is fantastic. Anyway, we started the whole process with our architect to go and get plans together so that we could actually get it approved, go out for tender. And that took a lot longer than we expected, because there's been a lot of work happening in the building scene around Hobart, and it took forever for them to come back to us, and we had to get various consultants to put stuff together. But finally we got plans together and we went out to tender early this year. And then it would have been in, now I'm just stretching my memory, February, March, early March, we received back some quotes from 2 builders. One builder decided he didn't want a quote on it, but we received back 2 quotes from some builders. Remember, we'd been given $200,000. We, as a church, had already invested $15,000 into the process to get the plans done, and consultants. They're just so expensive, and the council stuff. We'd already invested $15,000 in the course of, first of all, deciding we wanted to get a kitchen done. We realised that we would need to put in another kitchen for our church and for the community to use when the big kitchen was being used out the back. So the scope of the project had grown. We got the two tenders back, and the cheapest one was $490,000, and the next one was $570,000, and that wasn't including the $15,000 that we'd already put in, or the $28,000 of appliances that we would have to buy to fit out our second kitchen. Now that came across my desk back in early March. I remember looking at it because we were just so hanging out to get the tenders back, because Healthy Tas had been on our case about, well, where are you up to in this project? And we said, look, it's taking forever. And then I finally got some tender documents back, and I looked at what they had on there, and I'm thinking, dear God, it's all over. It was a great run. How do we... But, you know, actually, that wasn't what I thought. I looked at that and I thought, okay, that's a bit more than I was expecting. I better not tell Healthy Tas how much it's going to cost, because they might take the funding back from us. And I remember sitting at my desk thinking, and I shared this with the board on Monday night past. I said, you know, I was just sitting at my desk and I thought, I must be burnt out, because I don't feel worried at all. And I'm looking at this thing going, I mean, I don't know about you, I'm sure that there are people here and you've got less money owing on your mortgage than that amount of money.
Yes.
So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, this is going to cost us over $300,000 more than what we were currently thinking we were going to get. And I was thinking back to the fundraisers that we've done here at Grace, thinking, man, we are going to fall so far short of it all. I was in the process of preparing this message at that time. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to take the church along on this journey with us. Because all the way through, we've really believed that the Grace Centre is a bit of an object lesson. It's a bit of an example to us. If God can do something over there, then God can do something in our own personal lives. And I thought, well, you know, because I was looking at that going, okay, we've got to come up with a solution before we tell the church, right? But then I thought, no, I'm going to take the church along on the journey, because I want us all to feel what it's like to be just waiting for something to turn, waiting for a miracle to happen. And then we had to cancel church because of COVID. We had an outbreak of COVID. And then we cancelled church for 2 weeks. And then Kath Wills came and preached for the ladies group. And then I missed church, and Deb missed church for 2 weeks because we had COVID. And then we had Dan Warlow. Then we had Ralph Esterby. And then we had Anne Sakaris. Great preachers. We also, well, during COVID, we had Easter as well. When my COVID, we had Easter as well. But that was 8 weeks. And so today, this message was supposed to have been preached 8 weeks ago after I'd heard that we owed that amount of money. So I've become quite accustomed to saying that figure. Now, I'm sure for a lot of you right now, you're sitting there going, flip. That's a lot of money. So, what are we going to do? Now, we've just been reading about Isaac. How did he end up in Rehoboth? He stayed faithful to the command of God, and he just kept going. And we'll keep doing what we've always done. We'll put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward in obedience to what God has asked us to do. The same God who brought Isaac into a spacious place where he could expand in peace is the same God that our church is following. As one preacher once said, the best predictor of God's future performance is his past faithfulness. When you choose to take God at his word and believe what he has told you to do, you can have complete confidence in his presence and provision each step of the way. So why do I have confidence that God will come through for us at this point in time? Because of the words that Jesus said in Matthew 25. In Matthew 25, 34 to 40, he said this, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. What are we trying to do at the Grace Centre? We're trying to feed the hungry. That's why we're looking at getting that kitchen up and running. We're trying to feed the hungry. When a church aligns itself and its actions with God's expressed will, how can it fail? It was Abraham and Isaac's saving grace, and I'm believing it's ours as well. What we sometimes miss when reading our Bibles is the time frame that events occurred over. And it's one thing to read it, it's another thing to live it. So the ability to just keep going in the right direction for as long as it takes in life is hugely important. The confidence that we can all hold on to is that never once do we read of someone in the Bible who placed God first consistently throughout their lives, who didn't end up flourishing in all that God wanted them to do. And when we read Isaac's story, we don't see all that much happening between God and Isaac. But what we do see is that when Isaac took God at his word and continued to remain faithful to it, his life prospered. Even in the midst of challenges brought about by people outside of his family and his own failings. So some of the lessons that we can learn about God from Isaac's story is that God is at work in the process. Perfection isn't the aim. Believing God when he speaks is the aim. And it doesn't matter what mess ups people make, God's plan is continually being outworked in our world as we've seen in the past and is happening even now. It doesn't matter who's going to be the next Prime Minister of Australia. It doesn't matter what's happening overseas in other countries. It doesn't matter what China does in the next years ahead of us. That isn't going to impact on God's plan for the world coming to pass. Because as we are starting to see, as we're going from the start of the Bible and as we move through the Bible, there are all sorts of events that occurred that from the outside could look quite disheartening. And you think, wow, God's really lost the plot here, or the people that he's working with have really lost the plot. And yet somehow, in the midst of it all, God's plan comes to fruition. And we're going to see over thousands of years, God's plan coming to fruition. The same God who was there in the Old Testament is the same God that we are serving in the New Testament in these days. And God has a plan for the earth, and it is coming to pass. The problem is we live in a moment in time. And unless you can step out of that moment in time and look at history over a long period of time, you can find yourself being overwhelmed by what is currently happening around the world. And that's where the beauty of getting into the Bible and reading your Bible and seeing God at work over a millennium is incredibly profitable. Now, I mentioned that I was meant to have preached this message 8 weeks ago, but due to COVID, we cancelled that service. And 8 weeks have passed since that message was prepared. On Monday night, I had a board meeting with our board, and we discussed this whole $300,000 and something that we have to somehow get. And on Tuesday, I had a conversation with an organisation who has committed to making up the difference. So they have said that between $300,000 and $350,000, they'll put that on the table, and whatever we need to get this project off the ground, they will put it in. Now I was really hoping that we could have been on this journey together, and it wasn't just me and a couple of people sort of just hanging in there for grim death. But obviously God knew that you didn't need that at the moment with everything else that you're coping with in your own lives. But as I said, I have felt all the way through with what we're doing at the Grace Centre that it is an object lesson to us, and it's something that we can gain some great hope and encouragement from. Because if God can do that there, then what does that mean for your life? And I mentioned earlier on that Isaac was blessed in his occupation. Now, so oftentimes we think that God only blesses the spiritual stuff that we do. Well, the reality of it is, Abraham was blessed in his occupation. He was a farmer, and he got blessed. His herds got blessed. He got blessed. Isaac is a farmer. He got blessed in his occupation. Jacob, as we'll find when we look at Jacob, got blessed in his occupation. You'll find all the way through the Old Testament people getting blessed in their occupation. And they got blessed in their occupation because they took God at his word and believed God. And then just got on with life. And sometimes we think that it's really difficult. It's really hard. How do I discover what God wants me to do? Well, wherever you are at the moment, get on with your life. Do it to the best of your ability. Put God first and watch God bless you. And if you've got a challenging job at the moment, then I want to encourage you to believe that God will bless you in your job. If you're finding it a little bit difficult with your studies at the moment, I want you to believe that God will bless you in your studies. If you're finding it a little bit hard at home, in the family, I want you to believe that God will bless you in that situation, that circumstance. Does God know about the challenges that you're facing? Yes, he does. Absolutely. He knows everything. But God waits to be wanted. One of the things that I've discovered in my life is that when I put God first in an area, I then give God access to it. But what I found in my life is that I will often work away at whatever thing that I'm doing without even thinking about God being involved in it necessarily, because this is right in front of me and I'm busy with it. But time and time again, when I have stopped and said, God, this is yours, and I know when I opened up those emails and read that figure, I'm thinking $490,000 for the quote, and that wasn't including everything else, and I was thinking, far out. At that moment, I said, well, God, this is yours. We're here because we believe that you want to feed the hungry, and as a church, we're totally in on that. We want to do that. So this is yours. This is your problem. I'm not going to stress about it. And that's why I thought I was burnt out, because I was thinking, I feel really calm. I should be freaking right out right now. I'm thinking that's a lot of money to try and raise. And listen, as a pastor, sometimes you talk to people and you say to them, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, and then they say, that'll be easy. Just trust God. And I feel like thumping them sometimes. Seriously, because let's be realistic. In life is difficult. Life is a struggle. Life is, for somebody to say to you after the fact, that was easy, is not the same as saying before the fact, hang in there. Just keep trusting God. Because the reality in your life, you'll probably have discovered this already, that the challenges that you're facing, they just keep going on and on and on. And you get through one and then there's another, and you get through that one and then there's another. And you've got to persevere. You've got to keep on keeping on. You've got to keep your faith in Jesus. And that's not easy. That's tough. And it's like the further along you go, the bigger the problems become. That's the biggest amount of money that I've ever had to believe God for. I've never, ever had that much money on my plate. Now, I know of people that have believed for tens of millions of dollars, but that's kind of like, that's just a story to me. It wasn't until it was staring me in the eye that I thought, wow, we've got to come up with this. We're going to look like fools if we can't keep on going. But then I thought, this is my process, I thought, well, it doesn't matter if we can't pull it off now, because eventually we will, if we don't give up. We just keep on going. And that just gave me a real sense of confidence. I thought, well, God knew about this. God's got this in hand. We don't have to stress about it. We just have to persevere until it opens up. And I was hoping to take you along that journey with me so that I wasn't alone, hanging on to the edge of the cliff with a few trusty people going, I hope he doesn't fall. But God is good, and God has done an incredible miracle. And this morning, If I could have the music back, that'd be great. This morning, I believe that God wanted you to hear the start of that process and the end all together. To give you a massive shot of encouragement. Because some of you are facing some really difficult things in your own world, in your own lives at this point in time. And maybe you've just about lost hope that it would change, that it would get resolved. The question that you've got to ask yourself is this. Are you putting God first? Are you putting God first in your life? Are you doing what He's told you to do? And if you are, and listen, when I say that, it's not like God wants you to do 3,000 or 4,000 different things. What has God said to do in His Word? Jesus said there are 2 commands. First command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. Second command, love your neighbour as yourself. That's it. If you take God at His Word, say, God, I'm going to do those 2 things. Then you're doing what God's asked you to do. You've placed Him first. And those 2 things will work out throughout your... I mean, you're at work. Instead of giving somebody a piece of your mind, you'll be a little bit more patient. You'll be a little bit more caring. Same with it at home. Same with that at school. You'll endeavour to appreciate and value and be kind to the people that are in your world. Because love is all about how you treat people. So if you're doing that and you're facing a massive challenge right now in your world, then you can give that to God and say, God, it's in your hands. I'm doing what you told me to do, and I'm getting on with life. And as you get on with life, you'll see God do miracles all around you. And it may not happen immediately. In fact, most of the time it doesn't, because the process is really important to God. The journey is really important to God because He wants to, do some stuff in your world, in your life during that time. He's got things that He's reorganising behind the scenes that you know nothing about. But you can trust Him. You can hold on to Him. And whether it takes a 10-minute block in a sermon to go from we're in trouble to wow, God's got us out of it, or it takes years, just keep walking with Jesus. Just keep looking to Him. Just keep doing what He's called you to do. And you will look back and you will realise that you are far, far further along than you ever thought you would have been if you hadn't gone down the path that you took. You'll always feel like there's a challenge in your life. But when we turn around and look at where we've come from and where we currently are now, and we start to count our blessings, it's amazing. Even in the midst of unanswered prayer, it's amazing when we take stock of what God has already done